what does it mean to suffer, and why is it said that it is required for spiritual transformation?
Well, the perspective has to be changed onto this idea. Many people created philosophies and religions about it, why we suffer. But the root of suffering is still unknown, kind of. We don't need to suffer. We suffer as a consequence of our past incarnations, and because of the process of collective dispersion from the highest point of the cycle to the lowest. And the highest or the lowest doesn't mean superior, inferior. It means that we exist as a collective being, and then in the lowest point, or at the lowest point, we're dispersed. And various characteristics of this collective being are experienced as individual qualities, and that's why there are many people. Every person represents some kind of qualities or some kind of uniqueness. That's why we have these separate units. And then we create other interests and forms of dispersion even through our individual existences, so we disperse. Now, this dispersion may be interesting and satisfies our curiosity or our ambitions, but it kind of creates a deeper longing within ourselves. So the actual suffering is the longing for the unity, for the unification with the collective being in a conscious way. So unification means that we dissolve all those qualities that separate us from that subtle collective being. Because on a very, very subtle level, there's no separation per se. The separation in the sense we know it while existing in a separate physical unit, like as a body. So on a higher level, it is more like knowledge, bliss, awareness type of existence. Individual existence still exists on a subtle level, but that subtle level is not pure, because there were additional subtle sub-dimensions added, and they are of mental, emotional nature. And they support our existence in the physical body as well. Because we support these dimensions, emotional, mental, they still exist and they start driving our existence. Because these dimensions are not, they are self-created, they are created by the collective consciousness, they are the residue of the down cycle, but they are very real. So this residue created or gives us an opportunity to experience a multitude of different emotions. But when we experience them, we drain ourselves. So this draining can be also called suffering. The feeling of separation is called suffering. It depends on which level you are, which level of awareness you are. Lack of energy is suffering. What does it mean, lack of energy? Lack of food, lack of energetic exchange between people. We cannot exist without this energy exchange because we became bound to this energy exchange. Because this current dimension has bound us and made us addicted. We think to eat is normal, to interact the way we interact, to gossip, to vampirize each other, meaning to drain each other of energy, is normal, but it's not. But we accepted it for reality. So this causes us suffering, yet depletes us, ages us, and yet we accept it for normality. So if you accept something for normality, even though you suffer, you are ignorant about it. So suffering begins when you become aware of something that depletes you, something that drains you. Then you call it, oh, I'm suffering. You realize that your consciousness is too dispersed within the manifested, the projected reality. That projected reality constantly drains. Why? Because you've created connections with it. It cannot be sustained without our conscious support. So it creates all kinds of points of attraction that try to attract our consciousness through the focus, through the attention, right? So when we pay attention at something within the projected reality, when we give our conscious energy to this, we start valuing it more. It becomes important for us, for our consciousness. But it doesn't only become important, it also attaches us. It becomes our sort of a way to lose our energy. We are not free from the experience. To be free from the experience means to have any experience, but be free from it. The moment the experience is over, that's it. You don't come back to it. There's not a thought, not an idea. You don't go invoking that experience mentally, so there are no emotions. Suffering is this chain of keeping that past experience or past experiences alive through the memory, invoking them through the memory or through the senses, by employing senses. Or maybe you remember a situation because of some smell or something reminded you of that. And so it invokes emotions. If there's a positive emotions, you may smile and maybe forget. If it's negative emotion, you may start experiencing depression, anxiety without actually having that experience, just because it invokes the same feelings. So if you're unaware of yourself being, you will realize the mechanism of this invocation and the suffering, because it is invoked through memory. It's invoked through all these stories that we created about experiences. So we went fully in the experience. Or if we didn't just discard it, we created a story about it. We created an explanation. Now we seal the story and explanation with our emotions, or the emotions that it invoked, the experience invoked, right? And so we keep this all inside our system. Our nervous system is used to react in a certain way because we are brought in a specific social structure, religious structure, or whatever structure. So all that trains our nervous system to react in a certain way, to be in a certain way, to express or not to express in a certain way, to suppress in a certain way. And all that is stored in our nervous system. It means that it disconnects us from being authentic. And then we accept it for normality. We learn to create masks, to play a role, which eventually becomes our demise and our kind of our ways to suffer. But we can't realize it because we can't connect the dots. We can't still see it as a whole picture. So we exist between suffering and happiness, and we don't like something, we harbor certain emotions, we go with some kind of numbing mechanisms along our life, create addictions, create ambitions, create ideas, and at the end of the day, we aren't happy. But to admit it to oneself means to face that corrupt, that false self. And to realize that the life that I consider as normal is actually suffering. Because the idea of happiness or suffering is an interpretation of events, or interpretation of what's happening around you or within you. The actual suffering is only within you. You may be surrounded by amazing people, have all the luxury in the world, and you might be very unhappy, discontent. Maybe there is mineral and vitamin deficiency. Maybe there is childhood trauma, not maybe, but in the majority of cases, the trauma that does not allow you to simply be yourself and express yourself the way you are or you feel. So this constant suppression creates creative blockage. Creative blockage is usually experienced on the physical level as sexual blockage, or inability to be confident in the way you express yourself verbally and sexually in contact with other people, creating sexual perversion, fetishes, and stuff like that. This is the result of repressed emotions. But repressed emotions is nothing but repressed creative energy. Now, highly evolved beings are still in the body sometimes. Their body can be one, but their consciousness is collective, or they're connected to the collective. They may exhibit pure anger or pure blessing, which people will interpret as love. What is blessing? Blessing is highly charged positive energy. It's pure, it has no intention actually. But it allows to move blockages. That's blessing. Pure anger means to show that there is a boundary. The corruption needs to be shed. The corruption needs to be stopped. Only then. So you wouldn't like to experience the true anger of a pure being. But that anger is not connected to the identity. There is no identity in the sense what we call identity. It's not a corrupt identity, where the corrupt identity cannot even have pure anger. It doesn't know pure anger. The corrupt identity disperses anger into envy, jealousy, comparison, anxiety, resentments, grudges, dissatisfaction. It's just like little pangs, little streams of that energy. Pure anger is very powerful tool. But to exist in its pure state, one has to be the pure consciousness. That pure consciousness will not employ these kind of emotional energies or streams without wisdom. Because such energy may destroy this, or stop something from happening. Fear, the same thing. Anger will invoke strong fear. It means stop, don't go there. There are certain ancient places where highly evolved beings maybe still reside, or they left their physical vehicle, or there's something there. So these beings use spiritual protection. So when someone approaches these places, they will feel tremendous fear. They'll feel tremendous anxiety. They won't be able to move any further. Or they'll feel like they're getting crazy. So, but after all, it's one and the same being. So it's not even energy. Being can be dispersed into different streams of energy. Now the corrupt being experiences different emotions on a very kind of small scale. Every emotion is dispersed. A little bit kindness, a little bit compassion, a little bit service, a little bit love. So because of this dispersion, unrefined human consciousness cannot experience or understand pure way of expression, of emotional expression. Now, the more you refine, the more this expression becomes clearer, purer. But yet you have to be selfless, humble, and highly evolved consciously so that these aspects of your consciousness are used wisely. Highly evolved being will not be tempted to use these things unwisely. There may be situations where these tools are necessary, but in small doses. You can't give a very powerful blessing to someone who is extremely ignorant and corrupt. It may also create such a havoc in their life that can lead them to a mental hospital. So you understand. Both of these currents within the consciousness are there. They don't go anywhere because they're original ways of expression. True love is a blessing. It's the highest blessing. People unite in this blessing. People cannot even have thoughts of violence or harm in this blessing. So that's why we call it love. So we call it divinity, but it's the benevolence of our conscious expression. So many times highly evolved beings isolate themselves, but it's not because they are arrogant or because they feel that they're superior or they're more advanced. It's because that they don't have such souls with whom they can find deep connection. It's not that they wouldn't like to, it's just not the right time. So in higher yugas, the souls are more in union and connection on the collective level. But in this day and age, if a highly evolved soul incarnates, it cannot easily. It could, but it wouldn't. Because the presence of such a highly evolved souls among the corrupt souls may cause havoc in those corrupt souls' lives. So to avoid this frequency, incompatibility, and interference, highly evolved souls choose to be by themselves, or they interact with other highly evolved beings, whether those beings are on a physical level or not, mostly not in this day and age. The idea of suffering is relevant only for unrefined human consciousness in general. Once one refines the human perception, there is no notion of happiness or unhappiness, or suffering or no suffering. Just this kind of notions don't arise. The perspective changed. The perception is different. There's just a flow of life. Whatever happens, come what may. That's sort of a perception. And yet there is a deep contentment within. No one can take or subtract it. Because this contentment is the actual awake, is the foundation for further evolution. Whatever people talk about, whether they experience some kind of jerks or jolts of their subtle body, or some kind of, they overstimulate the subtle body, or they have some supernatural experiences, or they get in contact with some subtle occult clusters of consciousness, entities and stuff like that. Well, you may call it spirituality, but this is the spirituality of Kali Yuga. This is the spirituality of the demonic age, where every little cluster needs energy. People interact with each other often not because they actually are so keen on exchanging verbal information as much as they are keen on exchanging their emotional information. Many people feed off other emotions, other people's emotions. So this matrix, you may say, or this projected reality is sustained through these exchanges. That's why people sexually attract each other, because they need that exchange. That sexual energy then is used for their career purpose, or for their career advancement, or money making. All these forms of sexual playing, attraction, manipulation is the way, it is a sign of, you may say, energy vampirism and spiritual hunger, where because of lack of that deep or that profound spiritual connection within oneself and with others, we need other forms of energy. But those forms of energy are of lower frequency, so they cannot compensate. That's why we need them more frequently, more frequently. It's like a drug. That's why we need more food. If you eat junk food, which is depleted of vitamins and minerals, you feel like you eat a lot, yet you're never satisfied. That's the point. Because true nourishment of the body happens through the absorption of minerals and vitamins and the sunlight. And when it doesn't happen, the body, even though no matter how much you eat, the body feels depleted. It does not get nurtured substantially, right? So there is constant hunger. It's like you're hooked on a drug that keeps you or pushes you to take it more and more and more, because each time you take, the more you need, or more frequently you need it. The same goes with all these immature sexual connections with people or among people. They don't understand how sacred this connection should be, how sacred the body is, how sacred the soul connection, or what the soul connection actually is. They have no idea. So just exchange energy, exchange their karmic corruption, and leave that residue in each other's consciousness. Then they wonder. The more they the more connections they have, the unconscious connections especially, the more openings they have created within their consciousness towards something unwanted. Because they have connected to the root of this person's lineage. Sexual exchange is not something to play with. Emotional exchange is very sacred. It's not emotional on that level of ugly emotions. It's a deep involvement. It's deep appreciation. It's deep gratitude to the other being's existence. When such understanding, awareness is not there, the soul just becomes a way to tangle, to bind, to cause suffering. Suffering through the infliction of occult interferences. Occult meaning from the subconscious or collective being of these people with whom we interact, their lineages, their bloodlines. Serious matter. But people either take it to one extreme where they are very religious, very limiting, creating taboos of it, or they are too liberal and promiscuous. There is no balance here. And that's why there is suffering. Because in a limited sense, they are using maybe old ways of matchmaking and all, but they have no such deep spiritual insight why these practices were practiced before. So they just go blindly by tradition. Tradition is devoid of actual spiritual sense or essence, right? And so they become deluded by it as well. And many times lead their offspring to suffering. The promiscuity is the same thing. Through all these addictions, whether it's a food, whether it's different forms of drugs or stimulation, we create openings in our consciousness. Openings to the suppressed emotions, to the traumatic experiences. We overstimulate our being, not only our nervous system, but our consciousness to purge these experiences faster. But we are not ready consciously to face that purgation. And so we start having psychotic episodes, we start having suffering on so many levels because it overwhelms. That's why we should never open these back doors. We should just live our lives in a simple way and try to weed off the weeds gradually, day by day, slowly becoming aware of our corruption through interaction with people, seeing our trauma in these people and these relationships and these connections, and uprooting them gradually. If we're unprepared and we look for some kind of spiritual enlightenment without understanding what spiritual evolution actually is, we are calling for trouble. We are looking for probably mental sickness and psychotic episodes, because we are living in a mental asylum with different degrees of mental and emotional imbalance. But if we approach our imbalances and issues and traumas and identity crisis gradually, we can actually benefit from this process, because it will be called gradual self-refinement. If we try to find quick fixes and back doors, then we might end up being kind of socially unacceptable. Our society has kind of expanded the boundaries of what it accepts. So it accepted a lot of mental sickness and illness. So all this, what we're experiencing right now is normality, or they push it to us to experience as normality, is mental sickness. But yet we watch it, we approve it, we accept it, or many people do. And you're considered as being politically incorrect if you question certain things. So, and it happens so because we don't have enough shrinks, we don't have enough spiritually evolved psychotherapists who could take on this job. And even those psychotherapists and psychologists that exist have simply no capacity or no depth to them. And mental patients are many more. So there is no standard. And since there is no standard, it's simpler and it's easier to just accept anomaly for normality, sickness for normality, and just allow every sick being just to, this is the end of times. They have that freedom of being for just this very short time. So those people who are upset and wonder about this anomaly, what's happening now, and why all this bestiality and strangeness, weirdness is coming out, and why it is so widely accepted and demonstrated. So this being should be at peace, because this is only for a time being, it's temporary. It's gonna go. Because all that has no energetic capacity, spiritual capacity to sustain itself. It's not even spiritual. It's a part of this, it's the residue of corruption, degradation within the collective consciousness. So it will be reabsorbed at the end. So, yeah, and perversion is suffering, but there's no one to tell you that it is suffering until you yourself realize. So in this day and age, you are the only one who can heal yourself. You may become aware by yourself. You may realize that you are wounded, traumatized, dispersed, and slowly, slowly you may start, weeding off, pulling out all these roots and issues within oneself. Sometimes one may have a blessing to maybe have someone as a help, but after all, no matter how, what kind of people we meet or what help we receive, it is our own job. We need to do it ourselves, because it is the feeling, it is the contraction of nervous system or its relaxation that will be the result of it. Whatever you do, if you cry, no one can stop you, because you need to cry it out. If you suffer, if you feel that contraction within your nervous system, that's called suffering, which causes anxiety, depression. So it's a contraction, it's an ability to perceive oneself in a wholesome way. Wholesomeness means contentment, equanimity, regardless of what's happening outside. So because we are contracted inside, we're so-called stressed. Now this stress is the suffering. Or so many people are used to this, and at some point they just can't go on anymore. They age fast, they deplete themselves through whatever they do, until they realize and say, I have to stop, I have to take a break, I have to look within, I have to do something. So all of these external events, external things, they just push us to finally reach that point where we can no longer continue in the same manner. And we have to, you can say, inflict a change upon ourselves. Through these hardships and circumstances, our own consciousness teaches us and pushes us to face ourselves. Many people blame the external circumstances. It's my mother, it's my father, it's my siblings, it's my job. But all these circumstances seem to be pressurizing because we have that pressure within. They are just the reflection, and we call them suffering, but it's not the external suffering, it's the internal suffering. We wouldn't have this kind of life if it went for our trauma or the way we maybe misinterpret life or neglect something in our life, or fear to do something that we should do, or fear to be with someone that we should be with. Or when we go against ourselves, our natural being, this is called suffering. When you go against your natural being, and your natural being is what? Is a free express, is the being that expresses itself freely, is naturally flowing, authentic, fearless, blissful, content being. So anything away from this is suffering, whether to this side, up, down, anything which is kind of, away from this center is suffering. Even when you have a lot of positive emotions, sooner or later you will see the other side of it. Because our consciousness will bring you that which you have to purge out, that which is deeply stored within it. It doesn't want to continue its journey with it. So that's why it chose to incarnate here, so it can purge. That's why it's called the age of purgation. The judgment day, where all the results of our previous incarnations are here. We can face them now. We can either dissolve them, heal them, or we can choose to be victimized. It's a soul choice.